Test Studio by Progress, built with our patented Art of Test framework and Fiddler Core. In this episode, data-driven fine logic and language localization testing.
In this session, I'm going to show you how you can take a test in Test Studio and set it up to be a data-driven language testing test. So actually reuse the same test across different languages, and utilizing some data-driven capabilities. We're actually going to data drive the element find logic, and we're going to basically use a local data source for this. You can actually use external data sources, but in this case, I'm going to be using a local one. The scenario here that I'm working with this Apple support site. Basically, this gives you the ability to choose your country of origin or region or whatever it might be to essentially offer you the appropriate support through the language that's corresponding to that. So I'm using that site. It's a great example for this because you can go out there, you can click on a country, and then it's going to give you that translated website in response to that. So the basics of this, we navigate to the site, we select the country. Following that, we're going to verify that the welcome message is showing up in the right language for that corresponding country. And then it looks like we've got a couple extra steps in here. We'll clean this up. But basically, and you can see here just in this pattern, clicking on US, verifying it says welcome, clicking on Deutschland, verifying it says willkommen. So what I'm going to actually do is take these first three steps and data drive them so that these same three steps can be run in whatever language for whatever country across this site. Okay. To do that, we quickly recorded a couple steps. As you can see, it did capture that kind of duplicate steps there, so we're going to clean that out. And the way we're going to accomplish this, first of all, an easy way to accomplish this if you want to go from sort of the raw recording is to head back into the website using what we call run to here. Now, run to here is going to execute to whatever point you are determining in the application or whatever step you're determining in the test here, and then it's going to attach the recorder. So what we ultimately want to do is be in a live record mode at that point in time in the test. In this case, I just simply want to navigate to that page. So I'm just going to do run to here on the first page. You do have three different options when you're recording. Basically, you hit run when you choose your browser. It will go through that go through that test until all the steps have been completed, and then it's going to attach the recorder. The other reason I like to mention run to here, if you haven't used it before, it's a great option when you're wanting to get into a debugging mode, because oftentimes I might pull up an old test I haven't used in a while and just do run to here on that last step. Because what happens is if run to here, if it comes into contact with a failure prior to getting to the last step, Test Studio is going to stop at that failing point and attach the recorder. So it drops you off right at a point where you can start to fix things and correct things and insert and modify and edit your test. So in this case, we just needed to get to the first page. We're on the first page, the recorder's attached. One other thing I wanted to mention is after you're in a live record mode, however you get to a live record mode, whether you start by hitting record or using run to here, once you're in the live record mode, you'll also get run from here and run selected steps. This allows me to run a single step or a small group of steps on the fly against the UI that I'm working with. Run from here is great when I've fixed a problem. Maybe I've had a failure on step 3 and I fixed that particular issue, or re-record something or whatever I might need to do. And then I could just go run from here and say, okay, let's see if the test can keep going or how far it can keep going. And if it runs into another problem, I'm still in the record mode. I can still work directly on that issue, kind of troubleshoot my way through a test. So those are a couple great tips and tricks there. But in any respect, we're now in this live record mode. I'm using IE for this recorder. The reason I want to get to the live record mode is so we can look around at the elements and really view the application through the lens of Test Studio. One of the ways you can do that is by using this element highlighter. And as you can see, you can float around and look at the elements that make up the screen. You can add verifications against those elements, things like that. JavaScript events you can fire against the mouse actions like right click and hover over, scroll actions. And then of course you've got the entire toolbar and all sorts of things that you can do in your sort of second level of of test creation or test step creation. We oftentimes look at the toolbar for a little bit more advanced options. But as of now, I just want to inspect the elements that are here. And these were just naturally recorded by hitting record, going through these actions in the UI, and it was capturing these steps for me. And in turn, it was capturing the elements that correspond to those steps. If I click on a particular test step, we see that it points to that element, right? So there's a nice kind of natural connection between element and step. And we can easily right-click on an element and use the edit element or edit in live. Now, edit in live will be grayed out unless you have a live recorder open. Since we used run to here, guess what? We have a live recorder open and we're in the application right at the point we want to be. So edit in live for this United States span, this opens up the current fine logic that was captured with Test Studio's settings. Now I have to put in a warning label here. The settings for Test Studio out of the box may not capture your elements the same way you see mine. I've put a higher priority for text content in this particular project, so that's why it's captured it by using the text content. And I'm going to take a moment to show you what that looks like and where those settings are, because they are very important settings. But basically here we're looking at one particular element, in this case the United States span, and the two kind of combined filters that Test Studio uses to locate that element. This is key, especially when we're looking to do data-driven find logic, and specifically if our goal is to do localization testing. This is really what you want. You want to be able to find your elements based off of text content and then be able to data drive that content. And that's where we see this drop down here. We're going to come back to this in a moment. So I'm going to take you, and by the way, this is another area where this is kind of looking at your application through Test Studio's lens. This is where we're editing a particular element that was already recorded, and we're looking at the suggestions that Test Studio has brought back. So it's essentially gone against the UI, the live environment, and said, hey, in the DOM, do we see something that has both of these filters, matches these filters essentially? Is there a span that has the text content of United States? And it says, yep, we can find that, no problem, right? So that's all we need. Sometimes we may need more identifiers than that, and that's what these are here for. If we want to strengthen this, we might want to add a class to that, or something like that. We want to typically avoid position-based, path-based identifiers. They are here, but they're really here sometimes as helpers to find better stuff, okay? So sometimes you might use a path to get to a better intertext or a better text content or something like that. But they are here in case you need them. Since they're position-based, they're very weak, and ultimately, in this case, we're looking for a content-based option anyways, since we want to test it with different languages. So I'm actually going to leave it as it was with the text content and tag name, but I've verified that this is the format that I need. This is sort of the type of data that I want to drive. And now I just need to go build a data set that works with this application. So let me close this down. So that was an individual elements find logic and a way in which you can see the elements in your application and what Test Studio can tell you about those elements. It brings back those suggestions, and those suggestions are for you to make that element logic stronger for that particular element. Now you're probably scratching your head thinking, well, I don't want to have to do that for every element. You don't. Usually in your first few tests, as you're gathering your first few elements, you're able to maybe look at some of those find logic results and recommendations. And once you kind of see a pattern or something forming there, if there's a specific name property that's useful, that's static and reliable, the key here is trying to find things that are most static and most reliable. Lots of times text content can be, and text content is essentially the label on the button. That's how the users work, so that's sometimes a very useful way for us to work in the testing world as well. That also means that since we're not basing this find logic off of position, things can move around. And you know, the cells of a grid or the rows of a grid can move, new records can be added, things can be sorted and filtered, and our find logic should be able to go find it if it's not looking for it in a position, but rather looking for it maybe based off of content or something more reliable. So when you're looking at an element find logic, you're looking for those clues. What, for this application, is the best identifier? Is it ID? Is it name? Is it class? Is it a combination of things, right? And Test Studio will automatically combine things together in order to try its best to locate those elements. The settings for this And you can get to the settings by clicking on the project panel. That'll bring up your project toolbar. And the settings for this live in the project settings under FindLogic. Here you can actually customize the prioritization of your list to make sure that you're putting maybe a higher stock in one versus the other. It also creates a waterfall of a backup search method where Test Studio will continue looking for the element even if it can't find it, and provide suggestions when it can find something that might be close, right? So that all happens automatically. Now here in this list of priority, this is not the out-of-the-box list. I think the out-of-the-box list might have ID at the very top of it. And if you have an application with dynamic IDs, you probably want to look for something a little bit more reliable. If there's custom IDs, if they're automation IDs, those typically are good signs that your development team is working with you and is basically making the application more testable. Really, if the development team standardizes on some type of tag or identifier for their elements, that will help greatly in making the application more testable and really in Test Studio's eyes, make it easier for your element FindLogic to locate all these things for you so you don't have to go back and edit them individually. Right, so if we're looking at something that has dynamic IDs, we may deprioritize that. Maybe we'll bring class up. Maybe name is something that's a little bit more static and reliable. The other thing that I'm going to accomplish by using, by moving towards that kind of content or finding the most reliable thing is that this FindLogic should also be working across the different browser versions as well. So our test has cross-browser execution capabilities, and it's not based off of position logic. So our responsive design apps, our different UI kind of layouts, the different browser layout, it will still continue to work and find those elements, right? So here's where text content is. Now you see locked. This means we can't delete it. The rest of these you could certainly clean out if you wanted to take some of these away. So that just means we can't delete it. We can still move it in prioritization, okay? Also, you'll be able to add to the list. So I've already added inner text. This is also a good one to look for when you're looking at content-based kind of identification strategy. So I'll typically put that in around the text content. Inner text is great, especially when working with grids, because it gives you the text of the element and any child element. So the text of a row is all of the cell's data all strung together. Okay, so really great way to locate rows in a dynamic grid. So I've got some adjustments made. Now, another thing to note on this is when you identify that FindLogic that's going to work best for your application and you set it here in Test Studio's project settings, it does not change anything you've previously recorded. Okay, I've got a ton in here, but I'm constantly changing this to adapt to different applications. I, of course, see many different applications every day. You will probably be able to set this for your particular application and leave it, and even maybe share those same settings with other users that are testing against it, and so forth. So, so for you, you might not need as much of this, but you want to look at your application, analyze the application, learn what's the best FindLogic for your elements in your application. If possible, work with your developers and let them know how Test Studio works and that it does this, because oftentimes they can help make the application more testable. We actually have a great resource kind of article on this as well. Let me jump out of this. So hopefully you understand you can add, you can customize. This is really to tailor the Test Studio engine under the hood to find your elements in the best way possible. Okay, so once that's set, you know, if you do want to re-record something, it will record it with those new settings, or you could fix it at the element level if you needed to, or at the test level if you needed to as well. So that article, let me show you where you can find that. That is up here under the help menu. You can jump into the user guides. You've got your forums and videos, your feedback portal, so you can go tell us what you want in this application in your testing, in your Test Studio, and your support environment here where you can submit support tickets directly to the team. But in this case, we're jumping into the user guide. This is our online user guide. It is searchable. And if we look up, let's see, if we look up automation ID, I think we'll find what we're looking for. So this is a nice little article that talks about working with the development team, standardizing on that tag if possible, and that effectively can be used in the Test Studio settings so that it can make your tests very strong. All right. Okay, so coming back here, so we have our text, our elements captured. We're going to navigate to the site. We're going to choose a country. We're going to verify the welcome message shows up correctly. I'm going to actually take away a couple of these. We don't need these duplicate steps. And I'm also going to jump over to my common section over here, and let's go ahead and capture the browser. We'll get an image at that point as well to make sure that we've got a visual. Now Test Studio does capture your, as it's capturing your steps, it does capture images along the way. That's on the storyboard. Those are your expected state images. That will show up in failure as your expected state along with the failure image. But I'm actually adding an additional step here to make sure that it captures it at runtime and gives me a snapshot and stores that in the log folder so that I can review that after the fact. Now also we have just added video capture for your test execution 2. That's a test list settings feature. Check out our blogs if you haven't heard of that yet, but there's some cool capabilities where you can have your test list execution recording the video of that, either for all of them or for just maybe the failing tests in your list. All right, so we're doing a browser capture at the end, and here's where we want to now data drive this. So to data drive this first step, I'm going to have to tell it what country to go click on. Well, as I recorded it, it recorded as the United States span, and if you'll recall in the element find logic, it was using the United States label, text content essentially, combined with the tag name span to go locate it. So again, not tied to any position or anything like that, but using that reliable content and combining that with something that's a little bit more generic so we can tell it what to look for. There might be 10 different things on that page that have text content United States, but there's in this case only one with that's a span, right? So that's kind of what Test Studio is doing in this case. So I want to data drive this. I've picked a few countries here, and I've also gone ahead and captured the corresponding welcome message for those as well. So I've got this little data set on Notepad I'm going to pull over and actually drop into Test Studio itself. And then what we're going to be doing is linking those up to the corresponding components here. So in the text content, what we want to do is drop this list down and choose country. I'll show you in a moment how we get this data. Once you've added a data source to your test, you'll be able to data drive many things at the step level. You can data drive inputs and you can data drive verifications, but here I'm at the element level. And once you've got a data source on your test, you should be able to open up your elements and see a drop down there as well. So remember that data driving, sort of the surface level things are things like text entry or verifications on screen. Here we're not on the surface level, we're underneath the hood. We're looking at how we're locating elements, and we're going to tell Test Studio to go look for different countries by using this country column. So these are the columns from my data source. I'll choose country, hit set. It's telling me that this is now a data bound element, so I won't be able to troubleshoot it in the same way. You certainly can come into your find element screen and work with these, and you can actually turn that back off after the fact. So you're okay. But it will tell you, hey, this is data driven now, and as you can see, it's kind of injecting that country at runtime. So this one's ready to go. We'll save that. Now, since this is used in more than one test across my project, I could go ahead and apply this across the entire project if I'd like to. Oh, it looks like this one's actually been removed, so that's fine. But basically, if there is a duplicate, or if there are tests that use the same element, it is not duplicating the elements, it's actually putting multiple references to the same element, then you can update your changes across the entire project for that element. So when you just remember that when you are editing elements, you can do that. So we've data driven this. Next, we want to data drive two different portions of this one step. We want to data drive the surface level of what text it's actually looking for, and we want to look at the actually, we may not need to data drive the element find logic. Let's actually take a look at that. Now this one's going to come up and tell me it can't find it, and the reason being is because I'm not on the right page. So let me jump back over to my recording browser, and I could just turn off my element highlighter. My recorder's paused right now, so if I just hit United States, we should be on the right page. I can go click validate and see if it finds it. And great, we're able to find that. Okay, so it's also brought back for me these other data points too. So I have an option here. I could actually use the text content to data drive this, and this is where we're going to be seeing it in different languages. So I could data drive it with this column of data essentially. Or I could try a different way to identify it, maybe like page title heading or something else that is not specifically related to the actual text content. Since I have the text content, I'm going to do that anyways. And this is going to be, let's see, starts with, but I'm going to trim it down to just welcome, right? And I'm actually, it doesn't matter even that I did that because I've already got my welcome message column, and that's where that individual data set is going to be. So we'll go ahead and click OK on that. And now we have our second data-driven element for this particular test. So we'll save that. Again, if there are more than one test that use that element, we can update it across the project. And we now have two data-driven find logic steps, one to click the appropriate country and one to find the appropriate welcome message. Now, right now, this test would fail if we got to the country number 2 or the next one that has a different language other than English, because the text content at that point won't be welcome to Apple support. So we also not only want to change the way, we already changed the way we're locating this heading by using the actual welcome part of it and data driving that. But now we're actually going to change and data drive what it's looking for as well. So we're now going to surface at the kind of surface level here. We're going to jump over to the step properties. And if you've got your properties panel open, you click really on any step, you'll see the properties for that particular step. And up here at the top, we have bindings. This will allow me to drop down and see the current data source attached, columns essentially for the current data source that's attached to this particular test. And here we have that welcome message. So we're going to data drive that part as well. Now inside of my test step and here at the surface level, by the way, we can actually see that. So this shows that it's data driven because it's a data driven step, not a data driven element, right? So we have in this one we have two different data driven components now, the data driven element and the data driven step itself to verify that content. And we're using contains, and we're just looking really for the word welcome in the different languages, okay? So now we have that. Now for the data itself. So the data can come from different places. Data in Test Studio can be attached to the project with from Excel or CSV or XML, or even live database sources. Any OLEDB or ODBC compliant data source can be utilized. So wherever you're getting your data from, and of course you can even use extraction, which grabs data from the UI and creates data variables out of that as well. You also in the test have this option to use local data, this tab down at the bottom. Now I already came in here and I clicked this little plus sign which created the data table, and I already renamed by right-clicking the column names. I renamed the first two columns. That's really as far as I got before I decided, hey, I better show everybody else what I'm supposed to do. But because I did that, that's why those column names were showing up. That's all I needed in order to set up the data-driven components for my test. Now I'm going to actually put the data in there that it's going to be utilizing. So we've got the United States up on top here. Here we go. And then we have the corresponding welcome message for the United States, movements there. All right. And then we'll add another item and we'll keep on going. So France is going to be bienvenue, but this will be one that I can share with people. One of the reasons I like to use local data is because it does go with the test, and that way I could just supply somebody this particular test and it has its data source attached already to it. I don't have to supply, the separate data source in that case. Of course, also if you're using a source control, then you could, your source control connection will store your data in the source control as well. So that's not only the tests that are synchronized to source control, but also your data sources as well. And since I'm still copying and pasting here, one other thing to note is if you do use a flat file format, it will make a copy of that file into the Test Studio directory in a data folder. So for your project, there's a particular data folder, and that's where you will see your particular copy. So just remember that it does make a copy of it its own copy of it and stores it in the Test Studio data folder within your project. Okay, we now have a data set. So we've got 6 different rows. That means the test should iterate 6 different times. Now, if you can think of this, if we continue to build this out for this application, this is really just the first step of this. You may have application layers and layers and layers. So effectively, over time, I might have many columns which represent the different languages. And for those localization applications out there, some of you may be lucky enough to have a database table that may already have a lot of this laid out. Depends on the design, how things were put together in the application. But I have been lucky a couple times where there is actually a localization or a language table in the database that has essentially the buttons and all of the different labels for those buttons in one table. That's perfect. If you can grab that, if you can utilize that, you know, or associate that and use it for Test Studio, then you probably don't have to go through all that pain I just did there. All right, and it will iterate for us 6 different times in this case. We'll go back to test steps, and here we're back in our design mode. I could, from here, just use the run from here, but I'm gonna go ahead and close my browser so we can get a fresh start. And we could also try this on the different browsers too. So the first go, since we recorded in IE, we'll go ahead and try it first in IE here. Now, of course, also something to mention, you previously only saw 3 buttons or 3 options when we were recording. We do have 3 browsers you can record in, and run to here is ultimately a recording operation. So that's why there were the 3 choices for run to here of IE, Firefox, and Chrome. Those are the 3 recorders. But during execution, here you have the other options of Safari and Edge in addition to IE, Chrome, and Firefox. So we'll hit IE first. This is, of course, quick execution, so it will go out and run this for me and give me some temporary results. Keep that in mind, that the results in quick execution are temporary. And it looks like we may actually have a failure, so I can help you troubleshoot that as well. It's timing out here at the bottom. I can see it's counting down as it's trying to verify the appropriate welcome message. So something went a little awry there. Let's see if we can correct this. Now it's actually going through iteration number 2, it looks like. But as I've already seen some issues here, I'm gonna go ahead and pause that execution. In fact, we'll go ahead and hit abort on that execution here, because it looked to me like it was having a problem clicking this. I think I'm using a simulated click. I'm gonna just turn that off, and we'll run this again and see if it works better with the simulated click turned off, okay? So we'll re-execute that again, same browser. One of the reasons I determined to do it that way is, and as you can see, it's now cruising through the different iterations here. We're gonna come back and look at this in a slowed down way. But that simple checkbox, simulate real click, the reason that was causing an issue is because part of the simulate real click, if you look at it through code, which you could do by edit and code, but not typically necessary to edit these in code since there's so much you can do without it. But if you looked at it in code, you'd see that there's a couple of steps that focus the element and they bring them to the top of the screen. Now, in cases where you might have a banner or something on top of the screen that floats, it might bring it underneath that, and then that click step essentially clicks on the banner instead of the button underneath it. So in that particular case, and I've seen this even in some of the tests I've built, like on Facebook, for example, I could switch it over to code and comment those out. But in this case, I remember that this particular site worked better when I did not simulate that real click. And that way it does not have the additional focus and scroll to the top of the screen step enabled. So I've turned that off. Everything went great. Here are my iterative results. We got iteration 1, green marks all the way. Iteration 2, green all the way. I'm looking over here at all of the pass-fail here. Iteration 3, we're good. 4, 5. Now there's lots of data in here, but again, this is temporary data. If I rerun this or if I hit clear results, this will clear that data out. And of course, in the log 2, you have all of the different iterations here too. Here's oops, I scrolled all the way down to iteration 3 there, iteration 4, as you can see, and so on. So that went pretty quick. I'm gonna slow down that playback, and the way I can do that is by using annotations. And let's go ahead and do this one in a different browser while we're at it. We'll switch over here to Firefox. There we have our first iteration. And now it's slowed down for you too. You see the red and yellow highlighting kind of step by step for you, kind of gives you a little bit more visibility to what's going on there as it's moving through and selecting those different countries and then verifying that the appropriate welcome message is there. Again, using that data-driven find logic to locate both the button here and the welcome message, and then using the data-driven verification to verify that that welcome message is in the right language. And our final one there in Bulgarian. So there we have it, a data-driven test that can be reutilized, these same simple 4 steps, as you could see, rerunning across 6 different iterations, allowing me to test the different languages of my application. Now these tests can go from here into many, many different directions. And of course, I could utilize things like test to step to weave those together into workflows and stuff like that, and have a nice verification options for all those different languages that our applications support. Thanks for watching and happy testing.